The night rain struck the city like shards of glass against the windows, and Amelia sat by her bedroom mirror, staring at the faint glow of her swollen belly. Her reflection looked almost unrecognizable, her once bright eyes now shadowed with exhaustion, her lips pale and pressed together as if they were holding back a storm of unshed tears. She brushed her trembling fingers across the gentle curve of her stomach, where a fragile heartbeat pulsed inside her like a soft reminder that despite the wreckage of her life, something pure and innocent was growing. Her heart was divided between two worlds, the pain of betrayal behind her and the unknown future ahead of her. There was a time when Amelia believed her story had already been written, a love story she thought would last forever. Daniel had been her world. He was charming, handsome, and attentive when they first met, the kind of man who made her feel seen in a crowded room. He would hold her hand in public, whisper her name like it was a song, and tell her that she was the only woman who could ever tame his restless heart. She had trusted those words. She had built her life on them. And she had walked into marriage with him believing she had found her soulmate. But the cracks had begun to show far earlier than she wanted to admit. The late-night meetings, the distracted stares at his phone, the subtle way he pulled away when she reached for him. It had all been there, signs she chose to ignore because love makes fools of the kindest hearts. Amelia had clung to hope, telling herself that all marriages had rough patches, that maybe stress from work explained the distance, that maybe if she loved him harder, he would come back to her. But the truth arrived cruelly, and it arrived without warning. One evening, Amelia returned home earlier than usual. Her library shift had ended early because of a power outage, and she had been eager to surprise Daniel with a warm dinner. She carried grocery bags filled with his favorite meal, humming softly as she unlocked their front door. What she found instead was the sound of laughter, feminine, high-pitched, intimate. It froze her in the hallway like a statue. The groceries slipped from her hands, apples rolling across the wooden floor, and when she walked into the living room, her entire world collapsed. Daniel was not alone. A woman was draped across their couch, her lipstick smeared across his shirt, their smiles careless and shameless. Amelia's vision blurred as if the world itself had betrayed her. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't speak. She could only stand there, clutching her chest as if to stop her heart from shattering completely. Daniel jumped up, stammering excuses, his words desperate and meaningless, but the damage was done. Amelia fled that night, her sobs echoing against the walls of a home that no longer felt like hers. The days that followed were a blur of grief. She would wake up in the small guest bedroom of her mother's house with tears already streaming down her face, her body trembling as though the betrayal had seeped into her very bones. She felt dirty, disposable, unloved. The world seemed cruel and unforgiving, and yet, in the midst of her despair, she discovered she was pregnant. At first, she thought it was a curse. How could she raise a child when she could barely keep herself from falling apart? But slowly, she realized it was the very thing that kept her alive. The baby gave her purpose, a reason to get out of bed, a reason to fight, a reason to hope. But surviving was not easy. Daniel had left her with little support, and Amelia's pride wouldn't allow her to return to him, no matter how desperately he tried to contact her in the weeks that followed. She needed to stand on her own, not for her sake but for the child's. She found a job at the local library, where the quiet hum of pages turning and the smell of old books offered her a strange kind of peace. The routine was simple, sorting shelves, helping visitors, cataloging donations, but it kept her grounded. Each day, she carried her growing belly through those aisles like a soldier carrying armor. She felt invisible sometimes, like the world had moved on without her, but at least she wasn't drowning anymore. It was there, among the dust and silence, that fate shifted. Nicholas entered her life quietly, without thunder or fireworks. He was a benefactor of the library, a man known in the city for his wealth and generosity, though his reputation never carried arrogance. He was tall, with dark hair sprinkled faintly with silver, and eyes that seemed to carry both strength and sorrow. He noticed her immediately, not in the way men notice beauty, but in the way compassionate souls notice suffering. When Amelia thanked him for his contribution to the library one afternoon, he saw the faint tremble in her voice, the sadness behind her smile, and something stirred in him. Nicholas began appearing more often, not intrusively, but enough that Amelia found herself looking forward to his visits. He would ask about her day, help her lift heavy boxes, and sometimes bring her tea when he noticed she looked especially tired. He never asked about Daniel, never pried into her pain. He simply offered presence, a steady, gentle presence that became her anchor. And slowly, Amelia began to breathe again. Yet at night, when the world grew quiet, the loneliness returned like a shadow. She would lie in bed, her hand resting on her belly, whispering promises to the baby she wasn't sure she could keep. She promised safety, love, and a future brighter than her past. She told the child that even if she had to crawl through fire, she would protect them. It was in those moments she realized her strength. Betrayal had nearly broken her, but motherhood was rebuilding her. Sparkles, before we go deeper into Amelia's unforgettable journey, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Royal Stories, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of true love. Your support helps us bring you more inspiring stories like this one. Sparkles. And so, Amelia's life began to transform, not with grand gestures, but with small, steady steps. The woman who once thought she was ruined began to rediscover herself. She didn't know then that Nicholas would one day hold her heart, or that Daniel would come crawling back in desperation. All she knew was that for the first time in months, she felt a flicker of light breaking through her storm. Amelia's days began to carry a rhythm, a fragile harmony stitched together by necessity and quiet courage. The library became her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in stories of others, where she could set aside her pain for a few precious hours. Yet slowly, she realized that it wasn't only the library's calm atmosphere holding her together, it was Nicholas. His presence had become like a lighthouse on the stormy sea of her life. He wasn't there every moment, but whenever he appeared, she felt a sense of grounding, as if the earth beneath her stopped trembling. Nicholas was unlike any man she had ever known. He had wealth, yes, his family's business empire stretched across cities. His name appeared in magazines, and his success was whispered with admiration. But none of that mattered to him, not in the way people expected. What defined him wasn't the cars he drove or the properties he owned, but the quiet way he carried himself. He never looked at Amelia with pity, only with a kind of respect that startled her. To him, she wasn't a broken woman abandoned by her husband. She was someone resilient, someone worthy, someone beautiful in her strength. It was the little things he did that began to weave trust into her heart. On days when her ankles swelled and she could barely stand, Nicholas would drive her home, carrying her bags without her asking. When the nausea struck, he appeared with herbal teas and crackers, always remembering the smallest details she had once mentioned in passing. Sometimes, he would leave notes tucked into the books she shelved, short messages like, "You're stronger than you think," or, "The storm always passes." She would find them when she least expected, and each note felt like a hand pulling her gently back to the surface. Still, Amelia struggled to accept kindness. After all, Daniel's betrayal had left her wary of men, wary of promises, wary of opening her heart again. There were nights she lay awake, wondering if Nicholas's care was just temporary, if one day he too would grow tired and leave. But the next morning, there he was again, steady, patient, asking nothing of her but honesty. Slowly, the walls she had built began to crack. One evening, after the library closed, Nicholas invited her to a charity dinner. At first, Amelia hesitated. The thought of entering a glittering hall full of wealthy elites while carrying another man's child filled her with shame. But Nicholas looked at her with gentle conviction and said, "You belong where you choose to stand, not where others try to place you." Those words settled deep inside her chest, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel worthy. That night, Amelia wore a simple navy dress that hugged her growing belly. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but when Nicholas offered his arm, the judgment she feared seemed to melt away. Throughout the evening, he introduced her not as a guest, not as someone he pitied, but as Amelia, the woman whose courage he admired. People looked at her differently because he looked at her differently. For the first time since Daniel's betrayal, she felt like she belonged in the world again. After the dinner, as Nicholas drove her home through streets glittering with rain, Amelia pressed her hands over her belly and whispered to herself that maybe, just maybe, life was not over. She wasn't merely surviving anymore. She was beginning to live again. But fate has a way of testing fragile happiness. Weeks later, Amelia returned from work to find a figure waiting outside her apartment building. Even from a distance, her breath caught in her throat. It was Daniel. He looked nothing like the man she had once married. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed with regret. When he saw her, he fell to his knees as if the weight of guilt had finally crushed him. His voice cracked as he begged her to listen, to give him one more chance, to let him be the father their child needed. He spoke of sleepless nights, of mistakes he couldn't erase, of a love he now swore he had never truly lost. He reached for her hand, his tears soaking her skin, his body shaking as he promised that he would change. Amelia froze. Her heart raced with memories, the laughter they once shared, the vows they once exchanged, the dream of a family she had once built in her mind. For a fleeting moment, she felt herself faltering, torn between the comfort of familiarity and the bitter memory of betrayal. Her body trembled as tears burned her eyes. Then, Nicholas appeared. He had come to pick her up, as he often did. He saw Daniel kneeling before her, pleading desperately. But Nicholas didn't push him away, didn't raise his voice, didn't claim possession of her. Instead, he stood quietly beside her, his hand hovering near hers like a question, not a command. His presence was calm, respectful, unshakable. He didn't need to fight for her with words, his actions already spoke louder than any promise. In that moment, Amelia realized the difference. Daniel wanted forgiveness because he was drowning in regret. Nicholas offered love because it was his choice, steady and unconditional. One man looked backward, clinging to the fragments of what was lost. The other looked forward, offering her and her child a future filled with dignity and peace. Amelia wiped her tears, her voice breaking as she told Daniel that some wounds could not be healed by apologies. She said she had forgiven him, not to take him back, but to release herself from the chains of his betrayal. Forgiveness, she explained, did not mean a second chance. It meant freedom. Daniel broke down in sobs, but Amelia's resolve held firm. She turned, her hand finding Nicholas's at last, choosing love that built her up rather than love that had torn her apart. That night, Amelia lay awake, her baby kicking softly beneath her ribs, and for the first time, her tears weren't from despair. They were from relief, from gratitude, from the quiet realization that she had chosen herself, her child, and a man who truly saw her worth. Nicholas had not rescued her, she had rescued herself, but he had given her the strength to believe she could. The storm of her past was still there, lingering like distant thunder. But in Nicholas's presence, she knew she was no longer walking through it alone. The dawn had finally broken through.